The texts you sent me weren't just part of a conversation, they were chapters in our story. And as time goes on, I find myself looking back at those chapters, trying to understand the full picture of what we shared. Every time you sent me a text, it felt like a small act of love, a reminder that I was in your thoughts. I kept those texts to remember that love, to remind myself of the connection we once had. It's easy to delete things, to move on, but there's something about your texts that I couldn't erase. They carried weight, and in their simplicity, they held the essence of something real. Looking at the texts you sent me, I realize how much was left unsaid. Each message carries a deeper meaning, a longing, a hope, and I keep them to remind me of how much we meant to each other. I kept your texts not because I was holding on to the past, but because they were moments of clarity in a world full of chaos. They helped me understand you, and they helped me understand myself. There's a certain kind of beauty in words that stay with you, even when you're no longer in touch. The text messages linger in your mind, and they become part of the story you carry with you. Every text you sent felt like a small piece of your heart being shared with me. And now, even though we're no longer together, those pieces remain with me, a reminder of a time when everything felt right. I didn't keep your texts because I couldn't move forward. I kept them because they were proof of what we once had. And sometimes it's important to hold on to the good, even when things change. Every message you sent me felt like a window into your soul. And even now, when I read them, I feel like I'm seeing you again, hearing your voice, and feeling the warmth of the connection we shared. It's amazing how much emotion can be packed into a simple text. The words you sent me hold memories of laughter, of love, of dreams shared, and I kept them because they remind me of how deeply we once connected. In a world where words are often forgotten, your texts have stayed with me. They were more than just messages. They were small pieces of our history, and I kept them to remind me of where we've been. When I read your texts, I don't just hear your words, I feel your presence. They carry the essence of who you were, who I was, and what we meant to each other in a way that's impossible to erase. Every message you sent me held a promise, whether spoken or unspoken, that we were connected. And even though that connection has faded, your words remain as a testament to what we once had. I kept every text because it was like holding on to a piece of you. Even when we were apart, those words made me feel like you were still with me, and in some ways, I needed that comfort. Your texts were a lifeline when I needed them the most. Each one brought me closer to you, even when miles separated us. And now they're a reminder of how love can bridge any distance. It's funny how a few simple words can mean so much. Your texts carried emotions that I never knew how to express, and now, looking back, they still hold the power to stir up everything I felt at the time. I kept your texts because they were the only tangible reminder of the bond we shared. In a world full of fleeting moments, your words were a constant, and I couldn't bring myself to let them go. Each time you sent me a message, I felt like I was receiving a part of your heart. And even now, those texts still speak to me, reminding me of the love and connection we once shared. I kept every message you sent not because I was trying to live in the past, but because those texts were a reflection of who we were at our best, and I couldn't bear to lose that memory. Every time I read your texts, it's like hearing your voice again. The words you sent weren't just communication, they were an extension of who you were, and they still resonate with me even now. Sometimes we hold on to things because they carry meaning that we can't easily let go of. Your texts are like that to me. They're a window into our past, and they remind me of how deeply I once cared. When you sent those texts, I never thought they'd become such a powerful part of my life. But now, as I look back, I realize they were the words that shaped me, that helped me grow, and that still speak to me. The texts you sent weren't just messages, they were moments frozen in time. Each one captured a thought, a feeling, a connection, and I kept them because they were a part of something beautiful. It's strange how something as simple as a text can hold so much emotion. I kept every one because they were reminders of a time when things felt real, when the connection between us was undeniable. I kept your texts because they were like whispers from the past, small reminders of who we were and what we shared. Even now, they still carry that same warmth, that same feeling of closeness. Every text you sent me was more than just words on a screen. It was a piece of your heart. And now, as I look back, I realize how those simple messages carried pieces of us that I can never forget. In every word, in every message, there was something unspoken. I kept those texts not because they were just words, but because they were part of a story we once shared, a story I'll never let go. Every time you reached out, it felt like you were reaching into my soul. The texts you sent have stayed with me, waiting for the right moment to remind me of what once was, and maybe what could have been. I've saved all your words because they were more than just communication. They were a reflection of your thoughts, your feelings, and most importantly, of the bond we once had. They say words can't describe feelings, but your texts always did. Each message you sent held an emotion so raw, so pure, that it was impossible to delete them even after everything. There's something bittersweet about reading those old texts. It's as if every word you sent me echoed in my heart, and I kept them not to linger in the past, but to understand the depth of what we once shared. Sometimes I wonder if you ever knew the power your words held over me. Each text was a thread that wove our story, and now, even as time passes, I find it hard to let go of the memories they carry. I didn't keep every text because I couldn't move on. I kept them because they were the truest form of connection we had. And in those moments, they made me feel seen, heard, and loved. The texts you sent weren't just messages. They were small pieces of our history, words that spoke louder than actions sometimes. And now, as I read them, I realize how deeply they've shaped my thoughts. Your words always seemed to arrive just when I needed them, and they stuck with me. Keeping your texts was never about holding on to the past. It was about cherishing the feelings you once gave me. I've held on to your texts as if they were precious fragments of a time when we were everything to each other. Now, looking at them, I realize just how much of myself I've left behind in every conversation. Every message you sent me felt like a promise, an unspoken vow of closeness and connection. I never thought I'd keep them all, but now I see it was because they were reminders of who we used to be. Sometimes I think I kept every text because, in a way, it was the only way I could keep you close. Even when we were miles apart, your words made me feel as if you were still right there. The texts you sent weren't just words. They were little pieces of comfort, little sparks of joy. And even on the hardest days, they reminded me that we had something real. It's funny how something as simple as a text message can hold so much emotion, so much weight. I kept every one because they were not just messages. They were pieces of my heart. When I look at the texts you sent me, I don't just see your words. I see your thoughts, your hopes, your desires. I see everything you couldn't say in person, and I treasure those moments we shared. I never realized how much power your words had until now. Looking at your texts, I see the raw honesty and vulnerability we once shared, and it reminds me of a time when everything felt so right. Your texts weren't just messages on a phone, they were windows into your soul. Each one held a piece of your heart, a glimpse of your world, and I kept them to remember the person you once were to me. I kept your texts because, in a world of fleeting moments, they were something solid, something real. They were the words that anchored me when everything else felt uncertain. Reading through your messages now, it's clear to me that they weren't just conversations. They were threads that wove together our lives, our dreams, and our emotions in ways I can't forget. You may have sent those texts without thinking much of it, but I kept them because each one captured a moment in time, a moment where we were happy, and I wanted to hold on to that. There's something sacred about the words we share, even in the simplest of messages. Your texts hold the essence of who we were, both the good and the bad, and I keep them to remind me of how far we've come. Every text you sent felt like an extension of who you were. Now, reading through them, I realize that I kept them not because I was stuck in the past, but because I wanted to preserve the emotions we shared. In the quiet moments when I'm alone with my thoughts, I find myself revisiting your texts. Each one is a reminder of who I once was when I was with you and how much I've grown since then. I kept your texts because they told a story I couldn't let go of. Each message captured a piece of who we were and who we could have been, and even though things changed, those moments still hold meaning.